So when we use sound and music, we're impacting consciousness. And that's something that has not been studied very deeply, why humans are infatuated with music.
Cannabis truly is a pharmacy in a flower.
Survival comes with cooperation.
Pleasure is healing.
You're being a warrior of the weird.
I'm Lex Pelger, Director of Education at CV Sciences, and this is the Lex Files. Sound and music have always been essential to spiritual practice, religious rituals, and everyday human life. A song can command crowds of people, lift your mood, communicate the despair of the composer, or evoke the glorious mystery of contemplating the cosmos. Alexandre Tannous is a musician, educator, composer, and ethnomusicologist who studies sound for its esoteric powers and deep human meaning. Our journey takes us into the mystical and psychedelic aspects of sound, and even the mythical sonic origins of the universe. We learn about how sound affects the brain, as well as how it affects our experiences as individuals and as a society. The musical style of every culture says a lot about who they are, and each of us has the power to shape our relationship with the world by intentionally nurturing our relationship to sound and music. And you'll find out how during this conversation with Alexandre Tannous. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today with Alexandre Tannous. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Lex. Thank you.
So I've heard you lecture about sound and how it affects the brain in a lot of different places, and it's always fascinating how many different angles you have to come at the ideas with. And the first thing I wanted to ask about was that old quote, "Can music soothe the wild beast?" And it popped in my head as I was thinking about your work. And do you have a story with animals and the sound work that you do?
Yes. Yeah, certainly music can tame the wild beasts and just about any living creature. About 7 weeks ago, I was in Kenya and I was facilitating an experience in the Kenyan savannah in a beautiful lodge called Segera Safari Lodge. And as I was facilitating a sound meditation to a group of 14 people, and it was during the afternoon, a tower of giraffes, 12 of them, came by very close to the lodge, about 300 feet away. And you can see them, of course, and that part of the region is flatland, no bushes and trees. So they came by and they stood, and most of them were looking toward the lodge, stunned, mesmerized, and then they would look away a bit and then come back and look at the lodge and stare, listening to the sound of the gong from afar. But as you know, animals have far more sensitive hearing than ours and more fine-tuned, and they can hear far greater range of frequencies, much higher threshold. We're limited. And they stood there for probably about 30 minutes. And the general manager of the place told us that this had never happened before. This is unprecedented. Giraffes do come there because they have watering hole for them, and they put salt for them because the animals need salt and electrolytes, basically. But they stood there and they were not busy eating salt or drinking. They're just staring. And for them to stand there for such a long period of time was really quite odd. But so certainly did something to the animals. It's taming them. Well, it's stunning them. It's making them be equanimous and present, attentive.
And so what kind of sounds would they have been hearing from one of your typical sound meditations?
I was playing the gong at that time, and the gong has very wide harmonic spectrum, a lot of frequencies. The harmonic spectrum, harmonic comes from the Harmonic Series. These are frequencies, sometimes they're called overtones, and they're frequencies found in any sound we listen to give that sound, whether it's the human voice or an instrument or a sound of an animal, it gives it its tone color, the timbre. And that's how our voices are different from each other. Each voice has a signature. And these overtones are caused by the movement of the frequency in the instrument. And what affects the tone color is the size of the instrument, the shape of the instrument, and the material that the instrument is made of, whether it's wood, brass, other metals. In the case of our voice, it's the shape, the size of the vocal tract, which is the distance between the vocal folds, or people call them cords, and the lips. So, how wide or narrow the throat is, and how high the hard palate is or low, whether the soft palate is pronounced or not, and uvula is dangling, the tongue is big or small, the teeth, and the buccal cavity, so all of these things create different acoustical conditions so that when the vibration from the vocal folds is amplified, it becomes amplified in a very unique way. And that's what makes your voice sounds different than mine. It's the overtones, the way the sound is bouncing around in the space and being amplified, and the quality, the kind of the waveform of your voice is very unique to the shape, the size, and what makes that space. In this case, it's flesh and teeth. So, yeah,
And the overtones are the kind of the magic part that really can
exactly.
alter how do these certain sounds change what our brains are doing?
Yeah, good question. First of all, it's important to note that humans, every time they're involved in any form of sound therapy, let's call it these days, they call this sound healing or sound bath. Unfortunately, they're not the most appropriate terms because they don't truly describe what's going on. I like to call it sound meditation, which is a term that has been around. I did not coin it. I use it because it's suitable, it's pertinent, and most importantly, it communicates an active participation. So, all sound practitioners in the world, whether in modern time or ancient times, in the West or in countries outside of the West, intuitively they use these instruments that emit harmonic overtones to great level where you can hear them, because most of the time we don't hear these overtones. They are overshadowed, masked by the fundamental frequency. For example, when we play a note on the piano or play that note on a ukulele, guitar, or oboe, the overtones are there, but the fundamental frequency is so loud, so it overshadows them. You need a harmonic spectrum analyzer software to see that the overtones are there. What humans choose are instruments where you can clearly hear these overtones. And these instruments would be gongs, singing bowls, discs, bells, didgeridoos, overtone singing, even producing it in the voice, um, shruti boxes, harmoniums, and uh, also shakers and rattles. So they can be, these instruments can be made using plant material, but it's much harder to hear such great nuances. Sometimes you can create with instruments that have strings mechanism that would bring out these overtones. But the most suitable way is to make an instrument out of metal that is a combination of different metals, I should say, an alloy. The best example would be bronze, which is a combination of copper and tin, specific amount. So we're dealing with metallurgy, that's chemistry. And then you have an instrument uh, like this singing bowl, for example. I'm going to play it and focus your hearing on three variables: the frequencies that you'll hear, and you will hear various pitches going simultaneously. The second variable is the amplitude, how soft or loud these frequencies are. The third one is something that's called modulation in acoustics, which is how the frequencies, in this case here, the overtones, beat and wobble, what kind of wavering. So wow, 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 compared to wow, wow. That's a slower modulation. And the bowl would sound like this. So naturally, it has a very deep and soothing effect. Sound of the bowl has a great impact on us, and that has always been a mystery. That humans came to discover this power and to use it for a variety of different things, mostly to impact our consciousness in a specific way that can be used for transcendence, for elation, like the church bell is a gigantic singing bowl. It's overtones. These instruments are used in the Himalayas and elsewhere, but with great association to Hinduism and Buddhism, which is about going inwards, understanding who you are, what's your connection to the divine, and the wonderful things that we get out of spirituality. In nowadays, so-called sound healing, sound experiences, sound baths, etc., they're using sound meditation for people to go into a state of transcendence, of a transcendental state, a state of disconnect from the monkey mind. When we go deep into sound, we go into what's called a hypnagogic state. Hypnagogia is a state that lays between wakefulness and sleep, where basically the brain is awake, the person is awake, but there are no activities. So there are no thoughts. You're just being. This is probably the only time when human beings are being. We're usually doing, even if we're not doing something physically, but the mind is racing, the monkey mind, jumping around, tangent thoughts and micro thoughts, important thoughts, unimportant, the mental diarrhea that is incessive. So these instruments, the complex sound of these instruments has been used in a suitable way to appease something within us. I would use the sentence, they reduce the noise to signal ratio. They clear out the static, and they create a feeling of presence, of grounding, of elation, sense of safety, and they make you pay attention. And it's very captivating. And you don't have to make great effort to stop the incessive thoughts. It becomes easy while you're dealing with physics, acoustics. And people know to what extent the laws of physics rule the universe, right? That's what physicists study to understand the universe and study consciousness as well. In the old days, it was only philosophers. Now it's physicists. And they use mathematics to understand the nature of the mechanics of the universe and energies and everything around. And also on Earth. Nature is included in the universe, of course. So when we use sound and music, we're impacting consciousness. And that's something that has not been studied very deeply. Why humans are infatuated with music, why music is so indispensable in all realms. The religious, all religious ceremonies, book religions, right? Judaism, Christianity, Islam, immense use of music, whether in Catholic Church, Gregorian chants, and other more modern chants, and the Protestant churches and the Greek Orthodox Church. These are the most powerful ones. They use Byzantine chants. In Islam, call to prayer and the recitation of the Quran, these are Arabic modes called maqamat. They're mesmerizing. Take them out of their context, take the religious and the sacred away, you still have the same power. That's what you find in Arabic classical music. In Judaism, use of instruments sometimes. So in Eastern philosophies, the mantra system, the sutra system in indigenous ceremonies, in shamanic ceremonies. So no shamanic ceremony happens without music or sound. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who use music by itself and not music plus sacrament. So this is telling us what's really at work here. So we're dealing with acoustics. The physics of sound, music, acoustics impact consciousness in a very mysterious, effective, and useful way. And that's why we use music everywhere to create the lubrication in films and commercials, in sports games, in ceremonies, in weddings, parties, right? music is the most popular art because it's doing something to us. It's changing inner conditions. It's impacting the entire being on the physical, mental, emotional, energetic, and spiritual levels with variety of different ways that we find that to be very useful and indispensable, I would say.
And it makes so much sense. Even just listening to that gong or the bowl that you just played, I can feel something physically shift in my brain. And I have the same thing whenever I put on one of those overtone tracks on YouTube for studying or relaxation, or there's so many like that. And all of them just work. The minute I turn them on, I feel just this weird shift that actually only reminds me of something like psilocybin mushrooms starting to work. There's that little, like, I call it worms in the back of my brain. You can just feel this twisting that feels physical in a thing that has no physical touch. And so I was wondering how people combined psychoactives along with the music to affect shamanism.
Yeah, that's a great question. Humans have combined sound, music in a wide variety of different ways in all shamanic societies. I've done fieldwork in over 40 countries, and I've participated in a lot of these ceremonies. Always, I'm not going to say almost always, sound in some shape or form is used, whether in songs. Most often you find songs. In, for example, Amazonian shamanism, when they use ayahuasca, they sing icaros. And the icaro is the ayahuasca song. And Shipibo shamans, Shipibo is one of the most known Amazon Indian tribe that uses ayahuasca as a sacrament. They tell you that the icaro is the one that's doing the work, not ayahuasca. Ultimately, you need both. So they're telling you, and because they use icaros on their own, and they can help people with a variety of different things, whether healing or rehabilitation. And it's very complex what happens in the experience. People summarize it as healing, but there's more than healing. There's healing, therapy, rehabilitation, education, revealing, regeneration, rejuvenation, balancing, and snapping out of unhealthy baseline, all of these things. So they're recalibrating and readjusting. That's what these psychedelic experiences do. And it's very complex. So sound and music seem to be introducing a sense of harmony. And sure enough, the Harmonic Series is the place where the concept of harmony comes from. Why? Well, you are listening to, first of all, the Harmonic Series in its full extent is a series of infinite frequencies that you're hearing on a particular prime resonant frequency, fundamental frequency. And that fundamental frequency can be C, C sharp, between C sharp and D and G, it could be any note, and the series follows. And it's an infinite series of various frequencies. Between the frequencies, we have different musical intervals. It starts with the octave, it goes into fifth or fourth, and then these intervals become smaller and smaller and smaller and goes on to infinity. So they're bound together by a series of mathematical ratios. This harmonic series is basically audible mathematical ratios. But what's mysterious is that they can coexist together. An infinite number of frequencies can exist together in harmony. This is where everything starts. And there's a deep esoteric side of sound and harmonic series. And some people who have been researching ancient biblical texts, especially in the Old Testament, have done deep studies on them. One of them is a friend of mine, Howard Barry Schatz. His conclusion, having studied these texts and the mathematics in them and the understanding sound and theory, is that the harmonic series is the living God. And when you hear people, religions, philosophies telling you that sound is God, when first sentence in the Gospel of John, in the New Testament, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The word here is a mistranslation to the concept of logos. And the logos is the realm that exists where all intelligences are contained with it. But intelligences that are found in fields, phenomena, systems, patterns, and symmetry, ratios, balance, harmony. And it manifests to us in forms of fractals, harmonic series, music as well, tessellation, various aspects of sacred geometry, mathematical constants. This is the place where the concept of God comes from. The Old Testament starts with the idea that God creates with his words. I say his because Jehovah seems to be male, is male. And God, on the first day, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So God creates with his words, or you become God when you learn how your words can create reality. In Eastern philosophies, you have the universe was created with the primordial Om or Aum. It's not the word that created that, it's what the word Aum stands for. I believe it stands for the opening and the closing of the buccal cavity in the vocal tract that would allow you to cycle through the vowels. Ow, because every vowel has a different size of buccal cavity. So that's the resonance of your vocal folds and creating different overtones. So it's pointing the finger toward the overtones and the creation of vowels and consonants. Consonants are vowels, but with an additional aspect. Like, for example, E is a vowel, but if you want to pronounce it T, then you're adding a little flick with the tip of the tongue behind the upper teeth and the gum. D is something similar, but it's harder. P is E with the smacking of the lips. C, so on and so forth. So we create reality by changing the way the air is coming out of the esophagus through the vocal folds, amplification of sound, and creating a field of resonance, harmonics, and that becomes a sound that you can give it a symbol, a vowel or consonant, and that can be put together and create words that have symbology. So when I say light to someone who speaks English, then the person is going to understand it. If I say the same word to someone who doesn't speak English, then it's not going to mean anything, or it means something else in their language if the word light exists. So it's based on synesthesia, symbology, connection, correlation. For that to happen, you need sound. So this is the power that is used here in shamanism to shift reality, to use acoustics, physics, as the person's baseline is knocked off by psychedelic. What does psychedelic mean? Well, it comes from psyche, which means breath or consciousness, and delic, which means revealing, bringing forth. So it's manifesting the mind, manifesting what else reality can be, what else the individual can experience. As the person is listening to music, sound, so these molecules that we have in compounds we have in plants, they're shifting reality, and this is where the spirit is. Spirit, I mean, we need to correct our understanding to what shamans, indigenous people are talking about with this enormous wealth of knowledge that they kept alive against all odds, that they kept a powerful practice of using sound and compounds as organic natural technologies, but they need to be used as tools. So when they say the planet has a spirit, and people run wild with this idea, even when they're talking about mushrooms. Well, mushrooms are not plants, they're fungi. Fungi are closer to animals than plants. There are a lot of problems here that we're dealing with without being aware. So it's very important to understand things in context and to connect the dots, to understand that all humans are looking for the same thing, whether in Eastern philosophies or in Gnosticism and Hermeticism and Neoplatonism and in shamanic societal beliefs, in religions. What we have lost is connection to God, not God as in book religions. I don't believe in that. It's the biggest truth here is that we are fallen gods. We lost who we are, and we are trying to remember that and rediscover it. So I believe these indigenous practices are about that, and they're not talking about something different from those in Eastern philosophies. There are different practices and experiences. But we need to understand things in context and realize that they're trying to talk, indigenous people and shamanic societies are trying to talk about very, very, very complex things as best as they can. When you take them out of their context, they're already incomplete. Then it's gonna take different shape. It's gonna become something else. So what I've been doing is understanding things in context and to realize that this is a way to awaken the self in a dream. When we use the word spirit, which in English has 25 different definitions, it's a problematic word. It creates many different realities depending on what definitions people know of and what the context require. And we don't always make a statement that by using spirit, I mean this definition, not the others, including alcohol. Alcohol can be spirit as well, right, in England and the UK. So basically, spirit comes from Latin. It's spiritus, from the root word spiri, which means breath. Well, that came with the Christians. Christians eradicated shamanic societies, indigenous people. It's not a suitable word. We tend to call spirit whatever we don't have the word for. So it's a passepartout kind of thing, plug in everywhere and use and hoping people would understand. So yeah, similarly to sacred, the word sacred. For me, these plants are not sacred. Don't mean to be blasphemous. I respect those who call them sacred, and certainly the indigenous people. The place where they take us is sacred. The place where ayahuasca takes us, that's really sacred. If we want to be persnickety and precise and understanding things in context and really understanding the difference between the deep sacred and all things being sacred at the end, yes, I agree. But when we start to use it flippantly and plug it in everywhere, then we lose sight of what is truly deeply sacred. At the end, everything is part of source. Everything is part of the consciousness that we are experiencing and projecting individually and collectively. So shamanism, compounds, and compounds can have a spirit even though if they're made in a lab, right? These programs that are researching psychedelics, they make psilocybin in a lab, so that's synthesized. There is no plant spirit, even though mushrooms, psilocybin is the active ingredient in mushrooms, but there's also baeocystin and norbaeocystin. They're also psychotropic, but not to the extent of psilocybin. And then it's psilocin that gives us the trip, not psilocybin, because psilocybin breaks down to psilocin. So if you make it in lab, if we take another substance that can be hydrolyzed to psilocin, you still have a mushroom trip. So we need to investigate these things more deeply, because if we don't, then there's dogmatic behavior. We lose the capacity to realize that the self is the most important thing in the equation, not the psilocybin. Is how one works with psilocybin, how one understands what is at work and what sound doing. So sound is unraveling the self, creating an opportunity for the music, the song, whatever is being played, to impact us with a different ethos. Ethos is a word in ancient Greek that means describing the distinguishing quality, the personality, the character. So the ethos is when we speak, we are telling others about what's going on inside of us, the feelings, emotions, and thoughts. And these end up by creating pathos in the other person who is listening. Pathos is a level of reality. So when I play this chimes, and if we listen attentively to what the sound is doing, what kind of feelings, emotions, thoughts, visuals is evoking within us, allows us to experience something that we can describe as being lighthearted, happy, joyful, childlike, the sense of mystery, sense of awe. Um, and that shifts our awareness. Whereas if I play something, different chimes with different notes, frequencies it, within its structure, and the musical intervals and the harmonies this creates different from the other, then things shift. This one, for example, has more of a feeling of introspection, of nostalgia, sense of yearning, melancholy. It gives you, allows you to feel wistful feeling, and you can even create imagery, being indoors and it's raining outside and you're cozy or snowing. So it's very, very different from the first one. Whereas at work here is frequencies, intervals, mathematical ratios. So that's the pathos that the chimes create within us, depending on whether one is playing this chimes or that chimes, or this is something that has been explored very deeply in ancient musical cultures that's still in existence until now. This is how Indian classical music works, the ragas. You listen to a mode, we call raga. Mode is a scale. And if you're listening and paying attention, these shift your awareness and they shift your consciousness. Same in Turkish, Arabic, classical music, Persian, North African, Central Asian. In the maqamat, their modes. So this intelligence comes from the logos, which in ancient Greek has several meanings. It's word, discourse, plan, reason, ratio, mediation, order, pattern, and harmony. The logos in Greek philosophy and theology is the universal ordering principle, the divine reason implicit in the cosmos, ordering it and giving it form and meaning. And again, manifest to us in visual patterns and relationships and systems and fields, phenomena, energy patterns. So we seem to be dealing with very, very complex conditions that are that exist in the universe, and we seem to come from that, but for some reason we fell away from it, and we're trying to reinstate that, to find it again. We lost harmony. Look what we've done on Earth with all of our intelligence, the human species, with its evolution and modernization, and created amazing things, art and architecture and engineering and bridges and buildings and cultures, all of that. But how did we lose harmony to this level where we became plague to each other, all living things in Earth, that an ant colony exhibits more harmony than humans? I believe we lost harmony with the self. We lost our mind. We fell ill. And there are many factors that affected this: our ignorance, our misuse of money and the focus on money, profit over consciousness, profit over humanity, and how and what money impacted us, especially the reptilian brain that wants more safety, that regulates, right, many important things: digestion, balance, motor skills. It wants you to stay safe. It's responsible for fight or flight. Um, and because of the media and religions and political systems, how much they've used fear to shift people's reality, and that can become an addiction. And that's why people become addicted to the media. And if we look at and see what humans have been doing in the past 20, 30 years, they're rejecting system and going onward. Yoga is huge, meditation, sound, as of 10 years ago, and I saw that coming 21 years ago when I started this research on sound, the therapeutic and aesthetic properties of sound. Psychedelic research, shamanism, eating better, being conscious, Eastern philosophies, Gnosticism, and organic farming and protecting the environment and thinking about plant and species extinction and pollution. We're waking up. So as we're waking up, but we're also creating more destruction. We were creating more ways falling ill into creating hegemonic systems, like for social media, for example. They were created to allow people to get connected to each other. Somehow humans found a loophole to make money collecting data as people are doing that. And it's creating unhappiness. Instead of people truly connecting to each other, they're relying mostly on connecting to each other via the media. And there's a dopaminergic action here. And so we are trying to find our way, but the more understanding we have of these methods and not just repeat what indigenous people are telling us without really connecting it to other things, we're understanding it through different lenses and filters to understand what are they trying to communicate with this wisdom, and not repeat what they're saying, but to be skeptical, to take it apart, to connect the dots, to not prioritize indigenous people and shamanism and throw away everything that we've done in Western culture and philosophies and Eastern philosophy. So the story is really, really complex. But at the end, to answer your question very briefly, I've taken you, that's something that happens all the time because everything is interconnected when you talk about sound, spirituality, and consciousness. It's important to create this dot connection and zooming in and out and going into the fine details to understand that the story is very, very complex. We definitely cannot afford to take a reductionist approach in understanding sound and its impact on consciousness.
Hey folks, it's sponsor time. The company is CV Sciences, the product is Plus CBD, and the discount code for 20% off is Lex Files. And remember, the top 3 reasons to use that code on pluscbdoil.com. Number 1, I would give Plus CBD to your grandmother because I gave it to my grandmother. Number 2, I was the biggest skeptic. Then I started studying the endocannabinoid system. Number 3, I know firsthand that CV Sciences is committed to pure science and to enhancing well-being. So when you find yourself in need of CBD from true agricultural hemp, consider Plus CBD, the #1 CBD brand in the United States. That coupon code is Lex Files, and the place to use it is pluscbdoil.com. That's very true. And it reminds me of the old idea that to be an expert in one thing means you have to know a heck of a lot about other fields. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you about your origin story. You mentioned the commencement of your research, but when did you first know that you were going to be not just a lover of music, but a student of music who was going to try to research this?
From an early age, when I started studying music, I realized that music is going to be a very important part in my life, and I went to college and I studied different aspects of music. Eventually, ended up by doing 4 degrees over 12 years. So studied music theory, composition, performance, conducting, music education, ethnomusicology. I was infatuated by all of that because it changed my life. It served me well and allowed me to understand very important things for me, but also how much music meant to me when I played it, how it moved my consciousness, my emotional state, the deep meditative state that it put me in. And that love kept on growing and manifested in this independent research that I started about 21 years ago on the therapeutic and esoteric properties of sound, because with all that I studied, I realized that there's still a lot more to understand about music that I didn't know. And I felt that intuitively very strongly. And this is where I started. This research was for myself, not as something that can give me an additional specialization. Given that I was interested also in philosophy, Eastern philosophy, spirituality, and Gnosticism, and occult and esoteric philosophies and mystery school teaching, Hermeticism, Pythagoreanism, Neoplatonism, etc. Um, I I felt that there are a lot of dots to connect, and the only way to do it is to become a medieval-like scholar, right? They had many specialties, and this is something that I'm still working on, to understand the nature of things and not to lose sight of things by becoming a specialist who's so zoomed in on just one thing. That is important, but there are consequences. I'm more interested in understanding things um, as they connect, that holographic reality. So, and I started that research then, and that was based on a careful study of things and de-indoctrinating myself, learning new things, learning to understand and play different musical cultures, doing field work in many countries. Eventually, I've done field work in over 40 countries, scientific studies, gathering data from people I work with, being myself in experiences and experiencing things firsthand, and not just interviewing people who have done certain experiences, but really understanding what's going on through my perceptions, through the things that I studied and practiced. And that's very important, to have firsthand direct experience, not to rely on someone else. Why? These are very difficult things to talk about. Transcendental psychedelic states are very hard to talk about in the language that we have. The language that we have are for this reality. Good luck trying to describe a deep meditative state or psychedelic state. One has to be an artist to describe that, like Terence McKenna, craftsman of words and wordsmith. So it's very important to do all of these things and take a multidisciplinary research where there is syncretism and synthesis, connecting the dots to understand something so magnificent such as spirituality, shamanism, sound, consciousness. We absolutely cannot be reductionist, especially that our science drifted away from spirituality in its attempt to disconnect from the woo and superstition. And now there's a great movement of bringing science back to spirituality, which is manifesting in panpsychism and biocentrism and scientists' interest in Eastern philosophies and other realms. It's about the inner alchemy.
That's a great way of describing it. And I wanted to ask about your firsthand experiences and how some people talk about the occult nature of writing a book or writing a piece of music and how that composer writer can be there with you. Do you still get that mystical feeling? Are there certain great composers that you listen to, or recordings from your ethnography collections that there's something like it feels like they're right there, that they're coming to you, and it's some kind of mystical connection with the creator of the music?
Yeah. Yes, I absolutely do. However, now, with all the things my consciousness has been exposed to, all the things I've experienced, and spent a lot of time trying to understand, connect the dots, or to perceive it differently, understand it differently, experience it differently, I started realizing that the thing that makes the biggest difference in our perception of music is the mathematical aspect of the harmony that is used. So, as I said earlier, that humans tend to gravitate toward the use of instruments with audible harmonic overtones, like gongs and singing bowls and discs and bells. Music in the West uses different form of harmony than Indian classical music. The harmony in Byzantine chants or in Persian classical music or Armenian, Central Asian, etc. Music in the West became quantized. This is a very complex phenomenon that I'm going to mention briefly and explain a little bit, but I can spend many hours talking about it. It's very hard to understand. It's a concept that became known as equal temperament. What the equal temperament did, it created a quantization in the divisions of the octave in the West. The octave in the West is equal to 12 tones. C to C sharp, D, D sharp, all of these are different frequencies, and there are 12. If you go from C to the higher octave C, the doubling of the frequency, in the West you have 12 notes. Not all octaves in the world are divided into 12 tones. The Indian octave is divided into 22 shrutis. Shruti is a smaller division that you cannot play them on a piano, because on the piano you have only the 12 half steps repeating different octaves. The Arabic octave is 24, Arabic and Persian. Turkish is 53. The Byzantine is 72. So when you go smaller, that means you're accommodating smaller nuances. But the problem in the West is not just that it's only 12. The problem is that they became quantized 12. Quantization is that snapping into grid. You create an equal temperament where these half steps became equal to 100 cents each. A cent is a unit used for logarithmic measurement of sound. And in the octave, we have 1200 cents. The quantization means dividing the octave, 1200 cents, into 12 equidistant half steps, and then each half step becomes equal to 100 cents. When in reality, in a non-equal tempered octave, not all half steps may be equal to 100 cents each. We came and quantized things, so we manifested what we have been doing quite a lot with our ignorance or interest in profit, or deliberate action, kind of like a GMO to the octave. Let's improve on what nature did for an agenda, or out of ignorance, or this is something we've been doing everywhere. Let's create pharmaceuticals out of plants. Humans existed for thousands of years using plants, and now we have a chemical, a drug, pharmaceutical, just to, create a patent on it. So this, again, it boils down to interest in profit over being in balance, being in harmony, using things in an efficient way. And that, I believe, is something that we've manifested a variety of different ways, and we're trying to heal from that. But we're not studying things in context and understanding the human condition and its complexity with enough of ingenuity, compassion, empathy, creativity. So it is important to realize that with music in the West, as wonderful it sounds, whether the person is interested in classical music, jazz, hip hop, electronic music, rock and roll, and heavy metal, whatever it is, it's incapacitated because it's composed in a way where it does not take you fully, deeply to the ecstatic state, the state of euphoria, of enchantment, losing the self. Of course, that is perceived and experienced. I'm not saying that it's not there, but not to the extent that it can, had it been composed in a non-equal tempered system. And the harmony that we created in the West, which is called tertial harmony and functional harmony. So harmony that's close enough to the harmony in the harmonic series, but modified for functionality. Tertial means that we add notes, stack them on top of each other using thirds. So to create a C major chord on the frequency that's C, then you take C, skip D, and use E, skip F, and take G. So you get C, E, G. If you sing or play these together, they give you C major chord. And if you change the quality of the third, if you lower the third, the E to E flat, by lowering it half step, it gives you a C minor chord. If you add another third on top of the C, E, G, you get a seventh chord. So that's how harmony works. And we are the only ones in the world, Western, the West is the only one that created harmony different from the original harmony and the complex harmony, which is not always the same, but it's explored differently, but in a similar way, that Turkish, Persian, African, East Asian, Southeast Asian, India, all explored. We did something different. And that gave rise to classical music. And the early exploration started in the 11th and 12th century in Notre Dame School, in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. the early exploration of creating the harmony that we now have. And classical music in the different period, whether late medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, classical period, romantic, post-romantic, and contemporary, are all exploration of this growth and what you can do. And then another thing, really debilitating thing that matters, is that composers became deeply interested in novelty, interested in progress, in creating what has not been created, which is something we find in science and in Silicon Valley, being obsessed with progress, but toward what? Breaking away from nature and again, following profit and following misguided perception. And so we became ill in our progress because of a variety of different things, but the absence of spirituality, true understanding of nature, and everything in nature and the manifestation of the logos in nature, which Sir Francis Bacon called the logos God's word, and the manifestation of this intelligence in nature is God's work. I believe God's work is what we call Pachamama, Shekinah concept in Judaism and Kabbalah, Inanna, Ishtar, the divine feminine, Aeon Sophia, goddess wisdom for the Gnostics and the ancient Greeks. It's the embodiment of this intelligence. We lost our connection to that, and it's not just a feminine spirit. It has deep, deep, deep implication and explanation. And I think now there is an interest in that. So going back to your question, now I find great limitation in the classical music that I used to love and I'm trained in, and all the musics that I used to listen to. They're wonderful, but they don't take me as deep as when I listen to music with no equal temperament, music with different form of harmony, different investigation of the raw power in this organic technology that nature gave us that is encoded within us, the Harmonic Series, the manifestation of the logos in systems that impact our consciousness in a very particular way, and we are encoded to explore them in a particular way. There's plenty of examples I can give you. I've given you some, but I can give you a lot more. So it's not something that is in my head. No, this is something based on thorough observation, connecting the dots and getting to know many things other than what we have in the West. What we have in the West is wonderful, and it's not all bad. But we need to connect the dots differently and understand that all humans are looking for the same thing. And we need to learn from each other and not throw away all system and focus on only one system. We tend to do that. We go native very quickly and we think everything in the West is bad and we are to just listen to what the indigenous people are telling us because they are the only ones who have the wisdom. No, wisdom is everywhere. But the bigger wisdom is how to connect things together, distill them, and understand what all of this is truly about, because we don't have a lot of time to meander. It's 3 seconds to midnight.
So for people who are listening or excited about what you're talking about, this is really resonating with them, if you will. What are some of those practical ways that they could start exploring what sound does for them in their own home using their own methods? What kind of instruments, what kind of practices would you recommend?
Yeah, many. Well, first of all, be explorative and listen to the music that you listen to, but while paying attention. So, because music is entraining you. Entrainment is how things affect us. It's a big, very important word that we need to really understand because there's a lot of negative entrainment around, has been, but it's accentuating. And there can be a lot of positive entrainment, which is basically when we are sitting in the same room and we listen to music and we start to feel different and our body starts to move in sync with the music, tapping the hand, the foot, the head, nodding the head is entrainment. It means the physics of whatever you're listening to is creating different conditions, affecting the brainwave cycles, the heart rate variability, the biochemistry, the subtle energy. So much is happening. It's a whole other story. But basically, music affects us. In different contexts, it would affect us differently in church and shamanic ceremony. So the most important thing is your mindset, which is what we bring to any experience. Paying attention. Attention is one of the mindset. Unfortunately, people define mindset, which is abbreviated as set and known as set and setting, which is really important in a psychedelic experience. But set mindset is not only intentions. having studied this very deeply and paid attention and understand the mechanics of entrainment and what goes on in healing ceremonies and all of this, I believe the mindset is intentions, attention, will, awareness, curiosity, presence of mind, discernment, logic, reasoning, intuition, imagination, inspiration, belief, and passion. Many different aspects. This is phenomenology. These are the things that we bring to any experience and through which we experience things. They're filters, lenses, knowledge, and aspects. They're not always used, all 14 of them. Sometimes they're used to different, certain number of them, and certain ones are absent. Certain numbers of them are used and to different levels and degrees, and that changes from one condition, experience, situation, context to another. So becoming aware of the mindset while listening to whatever the person normally listens to and not just doing things, that can still be beautiful and impactful, but not as much as when the mindset is being there and there's awareness of the mindset. Further, I would encourage the person to listen to different kind of music than what he or she listens to be explorative and learn how to listen to the music, because pop music is music that is simple enough for anyone to understand without having the deep knowledge of what to listen for. As we all know, a lot of people dislike jazz because they don't understand it. They don't know what's going on. They know that there's a lot happening, but they can't tap into that magic. When someone explains to them what's going on, talking about improvisation, about jazz extended harmony, the role of the instruments, the rhythm section instruments versus the horns, syncopation and blues scale, and the concept of swing and all of this, then the person starts to get it, and one listens and understand that in classical music there's a form, there's a dialogue, there's structure, but unfortunately that can get to become intellectual and brainy too. So it's important to know how to listen, what to listen for, and to get used to listening, to develop the right sense of or the capacity to understand different form of aesthetics. And that thanks to neuroplasticity, which, through repeated action, we can change the brain. That's what neuroplasticity is about. Repeated action can create different neural connections because neurons that fire together wire together. Energy flows where attention goes, energy flows where intention goes. And that's how we create reality and we create the capacity to understand what we are being exposed to. If it's simple, it does not require the aerobics in the brain. If it's difficult, we need that. So people tend to bypass it when that's not available, because in music, in West, we created industry out of music, which means reducing things to light level so anyone can understand. I'm not saying pop this is not beautiful. It is beautiful, but does not require great presence, thinking, involvement, discernment, and understanding. So listening to Western musical cultures, Western styles and genres that require more presence and attention and understanding is great. And also to non-Western, especially music with no equal temperament, music with different harmonies, different divisions in the octave. Examples I can give, well, people call that world music. It's a terrible word to use to describe that. And world music can become everything. Well, in the West is not part of the world. So anyway, what they mean here is non-Western music, but word music of other culture can also be pop and reduced thanks to the impact of Western pop and rock and roll. So to listen to music of other culture, Indian classical music is a good example, Byzantine chants, Turkish classical music, Arabic music of North Africa, music of West Africa, music from anywhere in Africa, for that matter. Central Asia, music of Azerbaijan, music from Thailand, and Chinese and Japanese music, and music from South America, from anywhere. Just expand your repertoire and learn about that music. Another thing people can do at home is play an instrument or buy some of these instruments with powerful overtones that are audible. A singing bowl, chimes, small handheld gong, or even better, a little larger gong. That's really the mothership because it has a lot of overtones and they're so popular these days. I mean, if we pay attention, we can see what consciousness is gravitating toward, how we're trying to fix ourselves, how we're trying to reduce the noise to signal ratio to wake up. We are becoming Gnostics, seeking gnosis, which is knowledge of the heart, experiential knowledge, non-intellectual knowledge, knowledge that's built in within us, divine knowledge. We're all going inwards, rejecting systems. We're fed up with the nonsense, and especially these days, what's going on in the world, I believe that we are living through the apocalypse. Not the end of the world as people understand apocalypse, it's the lifting of the veil where the truth is coming out. The lies, the deception, the corruption, the inefficiencies, but also the good things that have been ignored. And we find that, wow, these are things that can help us. All the things that humans are resorting to using yoga, meditation, Eastern philosophies, and psychedelics and shamanism and indigenous ways of doing things, but we need to understand them with greater, more impactful lenses and light so that we as Westerners understand what is this about when they do that, because we're not part of these cultures. We eventually need to create our own form of shamanism in the West, informed by the philosophies we have in academic fields and sciences, and the study of what others outside of the West have used, Eastern philosophies and the indigenous beliefs. So, but without the woo, shamanism without the woo is really necessary. So spirituality, and even going deep into the esoteric nature of spirituality, but we don't need superstition. We need to understand reality. We lost our understanding of reality. Because we have been impacted by many people who, in their hegemonic systems, created reality for people, starting with the aristocracy, the nobility, the royalty, and then religions. Book religions came and did that, and then political systems and politicians, and the media now is doing that to a whole other level, and Silicon Valley, the technologists, the venture capitalists, and the engineers, again, obsessed with progress and discoveries, but toward what? It's so we need to understand all these complex things so that we make better choices to, at the end, to be entrained by a practice that sculpts us and brings forth something that needs to come out, evolution of the self toward Christ consciousness. Why we are dealing now with Ahriman. Ahriman is the polar opposite of Christ consciousness. Ahriman, spelled Ahriman, that Zoroastrianism, the first monotheistic religion, talked a lot about, and Rudolf Steiner wrote tremendous stuff about Ahriman. We have Ahriman manifesting the tendency, or basically like a major archetype of what humans can explore. Ahriman now is manifesting in mindless technological advancement, in scientific materialism, in artificial intelligence misused, and high reliance on technology in a misused kind of way, and transhumanism. So there's a huge potential threat. It is a threat, actually, not just potential. And it's magnifying. But Ahriman, I believe, is something not to be feared, because if it's happening, that means it's happening to teach us something that cannot be learned in any other way. In the same way, suffering can bring goodness and awareness to inner powers and capacities. Like in this COVID period, and isolation and the horrible things happening, people dying, people losing loved ones, people losing their businesses, but there's also beauty happening, is that people are waking up because of these harsh conditions. So it's the human condition, and we learn in very unique ways. And wisdom is not easily brought out of us. We sometimes need to suffer. Suffering is necessary. Pain is indispensable. It's not necessary. Suffering is indispensable. But pain comes from the misunderstanding of the nature of suffering, the value of it. And when we create friction with it and push it away, then we're not working with what is to be learned from that. So going back to your question, when what can people do is to involve themselves in understanding what's going on and to involve themselves in positive entrainment through creating a practice, because nothing entrains us more than music. And that's why music is used everywhere. Anything that our consciousness is exposed to is what I call part of the overall diet, not just the stuff we eat, the stuff we listen to, music and news, things we read, books and news and films, documentaries, food, people we meet, all entrains us in a positive or negative way. And our consciousness becomes a product of all of this fodder that creates reality in an entrained way. So it's very important to become aware of that, to diminish the amount of negative entrainment. Anything that would get us to become addicted to fear, shame, and guilt, and anger, because they're highly addictive. And that there's a parasitic energy in that as well, that the ancients did talk about a parasitic energy. It was called a variety of different names. This is what Castaneda called the flyers. Then the Gnostics called the archons. Gurdjieff called the evil magician. In Arabic lore and culture is called the jinn, the place where the word jinni comes from. Sri Aurobindo and the mother called it occult hostile forces. In Kabbalah, it's called Satan, where the concept of Satan comes from. So I do pay attention to these things to try to understand things in context and to understand something that's happening that we're not talking about. We talk about, humans don't always talk about things, name them the correct way. We often call it something else out of ignorance, like sound healing. Well, sound is not just healing you without you doing anything. The healer is not healing you. Healers don't heal. Healers create conditions for healing. The healer is the receiver. We don't contextualize it like that. We need to understand things as they are. And that takes discernment, understanding, knowledge, and humility. Ego inflation, again, debilitated these practices because it's hard to handle powerful tools. When you work with sound, with meditation, with yoga, with psychedelics, these are powers, and humans, as we know, are not trained how to handle powers.
It's a great jumping off point for the last question I wanted to ask. Actually, the second to last question you answered in there. I was going to ask about what music for introducing my daughter to this kind of stuff, but you gave a great list in there. But speaking of her age and her time frame, as someone like yourself who's also paying attention to the sociology of music and how it's out there, what do you think about the changes from so much music now being available because of YouTube and the internet from when you started your research 2 decades ago? How is that changing things for the good in terms of access, but do you see any negatives as well?
Yeah. Well, it's good and bad at the same time. Good that more is available, and part of this, the negative side of the globalization also has a good side, is that it's allowing us to become exposed to what people are uploading in Africa and in Southeast Asia. And so it's easy to access music of other culture. Just go on YouTube or go on Spotify, etc. But one has to know what to look for. One also, the difficulty is how to not become stuck in superfluous music and get lost in the process, and still remain locked into particular specific diet of what the person listens to. It's very hard for humans to exit these loops because we love habits. We love things that are familiar, that gives us safety. It's not easy for people to listen to something else. They always go toward to something they love to listen to because it's entraining them positively, and they tap into that very quickly. It takes effort for them to spend the time to learn to listen to something, and it's usually the way it manifests is that they rely on someone, like when we're kids, an older sibling or a neighbor or relative who teaches us how to listen to Led Zeppelin, and then when we were listening to something less than that, or how to listen to something more sophisticated, usually pop and rock, not so much John Coltrane and Charlie Parker and Bach and Beethoven. So it's important to be adventurous and to look for ways to learn about music. Spending the time and learning more about music, taking a course on Coursera or edX or some of these free programs that teach us music appreciation. They call it music, or something about music history, or the styles in classical music in the different periods. I mean, say jazz, or there are a lot of things, free YouTube videos that introduce this to people. So it's very important to listen to that and not to become stuck in senseless videos and silly things and stuff on TikTok and whatnot, but to be able to discern and choose and have intentions to learn things and to self-cultivate. It's very important for inner growth.
That's great advice to end on. And the last thing to ask is, where could people find your work if they want to learn more?
They can find it on my website, soundmeditation.com. I have a lot of sample of my writing, scientific studies, video lectures, huge section of resources, recommended articles, films, books, and videos, sample of my music as well, several tracks. If they're interested, they can contact me to purchase some of my albums. They're not on the website yet. I've also created another website. It's actually a collective. We called Resonant Mind Collective. It's a group of 39 practitioners, ranging from sound practitioners, meditation teachers, physicians, nutritionists, and people of other specialties. And we create free content, very serious talks, discussions, and direct experiences for people to access. I created this in the beginning of the quarantine to help people to withstand what's going on, because it's not the event that creates the trauma, it's how we react to it or don't react to it, become stunned by it. So resonantmindcollective.com also has a lot of my talks and work, but sound meditation is also so, and also they would be on YouTube. They can access this from my website, and I create a lot of videos to explain very difficult and important concepts about sound and the way it impacts consciousness.
That's great. And for everyone listening, we'll have all of those links in the episode notes. And there's so much to learn from Alexandre. I've been listening for years, and I continue to keep learning.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing.
A great pleasure, Lex. I enjoyed it very much.
Okay, until next time.
Until next time. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. To listen to other episodes, check out pluscbdoil.com, listen on all the podcast platforms, or see us on YouTube. Subscribe to the CV Sciences YouTube channel to see each new episode. And if you'd like to buy any of our fine products, use the coupon code Lex Files for 25% off. If you have any questions, compliments, or suggestions, feel free to write me at research@cvsciences.com, and please follow the podcast on Twitter @The Lex Files Show, where I try to keep it fun. If you enjoyed this program, please give us a like on your favorite platform or share a link to your social media. It means a lot to us. The Lex Files is produced by Matt Payne. The YouTube videos are by Brendan Cleek. Thank you to Tina Molnar and Jasmine Morris for the visuals, and the music is by Jake Bradford Sharp. Our sponsor is CV Sciences, makers of America's favorite CBD oil. And I'm Lex Pelger, signing off.